Hi, I'm Jack, and welcome to my little corner of booktube, my channel, Jack and the Book Stack. Hades and Persephone retellings seem to be all the rage right now, which is fantastic. I've always loved Greek mythology. As a kid, I really loved watching Xena and Hercules. I loved Greek mythology, the gods, all the tales. Particularly, I loved how these myths explained things in our everyday life. Now that retellings are becoming more and more popular, more are popping up, and I am all for it. I have read 3 Hades and Persephone retellings that I want to tell you about. Whether your style is a dark mafia romance, or a fantasy with magic, or maybe a more modern day and super spicy pick, I've got something for you. Speaking of variety, if you love books from a wide range of genres and the bookish lifestyle, then please subscribe to my channel because that is exactly what I make videos on. Let's start off with the actual tale that we are retelling. Who are Hades and Persephone? The myth goes that Hades, the god of the underworld, kidnaps Persephone. Persephone's mother is named Demeter. She is the goddess of nature, and she begs Hades to release her daughter, saying that Persephone does not belong in the underworld. Hades consults with Zeus, and they decide that Persephone can split her time. For part of the year, she has to stay in the underworld with Hades, and for the other part of the year, she can return home. Before she is released, Persephone is persuaded to eat the seeds of a pomegranate, and according to the legend, if you eat the fruit of your captor, you are bound to return to them. As a result, Persephone is doomed to spend 4 months of every year in the underworld with Hades, and the remaining of the time she can return home to her mother, Demeter. I've seen some contradictions on the actual number of months. I thought it was always 6 months of the year she had to stay with Hades, and 6 months she could return home. So let's just say between 4 and 6 months, she has to hook up with Hades in the underworld. The reason this Greek tale is one of my favorites is because this is designed to explain the seasons. So when Persephone is with the goddess of nature, her mother Demeter, that is spring and summertime. And when she is away from her mother and she's in the underworld with Hades, that is fall and winter when it's super cold. Ultimately, Persephone is the goddess of spring. So roughly, that is the tale that has inspired a slew of other books for us to enjoy. So let's go ahead and get started with some of them. Going into my first Hades and Persephone retelling, I had this myth in my mind, and so I had high expectations of a story that represented that. I did not have the right expectations for this first book, and honestly, at first, I didn't really enjoy it because it was so far-fetched from what I was expecting, what I was looking for, what I wanted, but the longer and longer I reflect on it, I really love it. That book is Neon Gods by Katie Robert. If you want the creativity of a modern day retelling, and if you want a lot of spice, then this is the one for you. While I knew to expect spice in this book because this was kind of my first official smut book, I was really hoping that it would be a little bit more fantasy based. I was hoping the spice would be between the gods, and that was not the case. This is a modern day. The gods are not mythical creatures, they are political figures. This story goes that Demeter promises her daughter Persephone to marry Zeus. Persephone is not into it because Zeus has been married before. His wives become Heras, which is like the position of his wife, and they've all ended up mysteriously dead. So she runs away. The only thing she can think of is to escape across the river to this other area, which is kind of like the equivalent of the underworld here, and it is ruled by Hades. Hades hates Zeus for his own reasons, so when Persephone comes around, they decide to team up to get back at Zeus. And what better way for Hades to get revenge and for Persephone to no longer be desirable by Zeus is to have lots of public sex. So that is essentially the plot, but most of this book is the sex. So it is very spicy, lots of variety, very different. I really enjoyed that aspect. Reflecting back on it, I really appreciate all the creativity that went into this, kind of the nods to the legends. You have Ares, who is the god of war in Legends, but in this one, he is in charge of the military. Something I am a sucker for in books is when there is a misunderstood bad boy who truly has a heart of gold. Kind of the whole trope where he's only a bad guy because he doesn't care about his reputation. He's more focused on ruling or leading his people and making sure everyone is safe. In that regard, I really loved Hades. I also love the way that he took care of Persephone and kind of protected her. I wasn't the biggest fan of Persephone in this book. I thought she was a little bit whiny, a little bit fragile, but ultimately what stuck with me was the spice and the creativity of this world. As long as you go into this one knowing that it's a modern day retelling and there's no magic, there are no gods, then I think you'll enjoy it a lot more, especially if you're looking for a spicy book. In my quest to find a Hades and Persephone retelling that really hit the mood I was looking for, I checked out the audiobook For a Touch of Darkness. This is the fantasy retelling I was looking for. It is still set in a modern setting, but we follow Persephone, who is the goddess of springtime. She is 24 years old, she's a college student, she's working at an internship, she's really trying to be normal. She has this glamour that hides her true goddess identity. She just wants to be a normal student creating independence from her mother, Demeter. The gods in this world warrant a lot of attention from the everyday people, and Hades, for example, owns a nightclub that is very exclusive and hard to get into. Because it's so exclusive, Persephone and her friend jump at the chance to get into Hades' nightclub. Hades is a notorious gambler, and the stakes are always impossibly high, because if you lose, he gets your soul. Persephone gets tricked into an agreement with him, and so she has to spend part of her time in the underworld in order to complete this task and gain her freedom from this bargain. I loved the fantasy of this book. I loved the dynamics of the gods. I loved the underworld. I love, again, how we have a misunderstood bad guy. So he's the god of the underworld. He has a reputation of being evil, but you really see that he doesn't care about his reputation and what people think of him. All he cares about are the souls in his protection. I loved learning more about Hades and unraveling his soft heart underneath a hard exterior shell, but I didn't really enjoy Persephone all that much. She very much read like a 24-year-old. She had uncontrollable jealousy over Hades' assistant, and it just made me cringe. Homegirl needs some confidence. She needs to relax. She needs some cool going on. Didn't really like that part. A Touch of Darkness is the first book in the series where we have Hades and Persephone meeting and falling in love, but their relationship is largely still a secret to the public. In book 2, it looks like they go public with their relationship, and there is some more deals and bargaining in a very awkward situation. Book 3 looks like it really picks up the myth because Demeter is pissed off that Hades and Persephone are engaged. Demeter calls for a crippling snowstorm and demands that Persephone returns to her. So I think in book 3, you really get that element of Persephone being in the underworld, and that's wintertime, and then when she goes home, that's spring and summertime. So in that regard, I really like this series. Book 4 in the series, it looks like you're gonna have your standard fantasy war trope, and Persephone has to fight for humanity and all that stuff. I'm not really interested in fantasy war stories, so I definitely won't be reading that one. But if you're into it, check it out, because this fantasy world with the gods is really cool and really unique. A Touch of Darkness really hit the mark of what I was looking for in a Hades and Persephone retelling, because it was a nod to the magic and the myth. Even if you have to read a few books in order to get to that ultimate part, I really like how it's being built up for us. If you are interested in Hades and Persephone retellings and mafia romances, then maybe you should check out Promises and Pomegranates. This book kept popping up when I was searching for Hades and Persephone retellings, and when I opened it up and looked at the author's note, it says, Cal and Elena's story is a dark contemporary romance based loosely on the framework and characters from the myth of Hades and Persephone. Please be aware that it is not fantasy, historical romance, or a literal retelling. This book is a dark romance, meaning it includes many triggers such as graphic violence, explicit sexual scenes, and other mature situations. While Promises and Pomegranates is a standalone, reading the prequel may enhance your reading experience, although it is not required to read anything before this book. Keep that in mind because I'm coming back to that later. This book starts off with Cal. He is a doctor to this mafia family, and he goes ahead and kind of interrupts this wedding by killing the groom, stealing the bride, and forcing her to marry him. Okay, I'll play along with that. This is a mafia romance after all, but the writing in this was so bad. I said in the author's note that you are not required to read anything before this. This is book 1 in Monsters and Muses series. So book 1, but every single page, I had no idea what was going on. They were referencing something that happened previously that the readers were not a part of. It wasn't even a flashback. Our characters were talking about this or having an inner monologue, and you were just expected to know what happened. Seems like right before the wedding, Kale and Elena had sex. She lost her virginity to him. It was on video so everyone could see it, and it would get out and be publicized that she cheated on her fiance. And it was just weird how it was written. It was so weird. You kind of like when you're hanging out with people and they have an inside joke that you're not a part of and you just feel uncomfortable and left out. That's how this book was. And that is exactly how the writing style was for the whole 25% of it that I did read before I ended up DNFing it. I mean, it's so bad. There's a part at about the 20% mark where she's looking at a scar or like an injury on her skin, and she's saying something like, oh, and that's where he carved his initial into me on that night that we had sex. And you're like, what the hell? This is a weird reflection. It's not the fact that it was a mafia book that threw me off. It was the writing style that I just really did not enjoy. The author's note did prepare us that it is very loosely based on Hades and Persephone, and that is absolutely true because obviously our characters' names, Cal and Elena, are not Hades and Persephone. There's no fantasy, which we were warned about. There's no gods or anything like that. I really thought they could make a mafia spin on this really work. But the only kind of nod to the legend is that Kale or Cal, I don't even know what to call him, Cal forced her into this marriage, so that's kind of like the kidnapping aspect from the tale. And then he says a couple times, like he calls her my little Persephone. He also calls her little one, which I think is the creepiest nickname. A little bit too much of a pedophile aspect for me. It just, yeah. There was really an opportunity here to do a unique mafia romance spin on the Hades and Persephone myth, but it just fell completely flat. The author's note did say it was very loosely based, so I was mentally prepared for that. It was just truly a missed opportunity. Please tell me down below in the comments if you know of any other Hades and Persephone retellings. I think there is a lot of opportunity here for some really cool creative takes on the myth, so I'm dying to check out more, and who knows, maybe I can become a connoisseur of this Hades and Persephone trope. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this video, and I will see you in the next one.